We're excited for everyone to join us today um, for our Lunch and Learn. Wonderful topic, relationships and disabilities. We do need to go over just a few housekeeping items before we jump right into the presentation. Kelly, if you can go to the next screen. A little bit about Kentucky SPIN, or Kentucky Special Parent Involvement Network. We are the Parent Training and Information Center funded by the U.S. Department of Education under IDEA since 1988, when Kentucky first received a PTI. Kentucky SPIN Parent Center provides training, information, and support for children and youth with all types of disabilities, birth through 26 years old and beyond, their parents, families, as well as professionals. It is easier when we look here at the next screen to say what we don't do in comparison to what we do. We are not attorneys. We do not act as attorneys or represent families or give legal advice. We do, however, empower families to advocate for themselves and their children effectively. We provide a peer-to-peer support model to help support families access much needed information and resources so that they can reach their goals and feel successful. I do want to remind everyone today that most of us are working from home, so we do ask for grace if you might hear a noise in the background, or maybe the connection is interrupted. We have wonderful staff on here that'll be able to jump in and take over and answer any questions that you may have. There is a chat function as well as a Q&A function. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put those in there and we'll make sure to get any questions answered as we come to those. And then on the next screen here, I'm going to hand things over to our guest speaker today. We're so excited to have Elisabeth. If you'd like to tell a little bit about yourself, Elisabeth.
Absolutely. Thank you all for inviting me here. It is an honor to get invited to these things and to be able to share what I have passion about, which is preventing people from being in any type of violent relationships, whether that be friendships or intimate partner relationships. I love getting in the schools and talking about intimate partner violence, about how to have a healthy relationship, and to really get in there and share with kids who may not otherwise know what healthy relationships look like, just a little bit of information about what they do look like and how to get that for themselves, even if they've not seen it in their home or have that modeling done as they grow up. We see a lot of ladies here in the shelter, and I'll tell you in a minute what we do, that just haven't had any kind of education on what healthy relationships really look like. So I really like to do these presentations and to do this type of outreach to just share what it is that I'm passionate about and what I want to see different in the world that we live in. So I'm going to do a quick introduction to what the Bethany House Abuse Shelter does and what kinds of services that we do provide. We're going to talk a little bit about disabilities and relationships and what that kind of looks like, and maybe looks a little different from what it might look like in a relationship between two people who do not have disabilities. I want to talk a little bit about how to recognize the healthy versus the unhealthy, and I want to also talk about how you would find help if you needed that help. And so first, a little bit about Bethany House Abuse Shelter. It is located in Somerset, Kentucky. We do serve 10 counties, and it's the Lake Cumberland Ad District, which is the Adair, Casey, Clinton, Cumberland, Greene, McCreary, Pulaski, Russell, Taylor, and Wayne. So that is a huge service area. It is the service area for a lot of different things because that area development district does dictate a lot of different types of funds. As you all probably know, if you are involved in any kind of program, sometimes they are categorized by those county divisions that the area development district makes. So we do have this huge service area that we try to cover. We try to provide lots of different services, but mainly we are an emergency shelter or a homeless shelter for people who are trying to flee intimate partner violence. We provide them with everything they need when they're here, and we want that to be our primary focus, is providing that service. However, we also do a support group. We do one in Pulaski County, and then we also do one in Taylor County to get the other side of our service district. And that is it's called Survivors of Domestic Abuse, and it is just a support group that can provide information and provide a little bit of healing to people who've been through some really hard things. I mean, that's free and open to the public. We also provide a lot of court advocacy in all 10 of those counties. And then we also do a lot of community outreach. So we do things like what I'm doing now, as well as in the schools or for community events. And I'll apologize about the phone. It may ring more. A little bit about what shelter life is. This is a picture of our shelter. It does remind you of a house, a big, really big house. And the reason for that is because we want to have a home atmosphere for people. We want them to feel like this is a home that they can come to temporarily in order to heal and to get into something that is theirs and that is more permanent. Now, that doesn't mean that every person that walks through our doors essentially gets housing, because we all know that people don't always make the decisions we want them to make. So sometimes they come here and they do get rehoused, and then sometimes they do not. They will have access to case management, to group counseling, to crisis intervention, and to court advocacy while they're here on site. We do provide all of the food that they need. They do not have to relinquish food stamps or anything like that to get food here. We provide for everything they need. We provide hygiene, transportation, and for most of their basic needs. As long as it's something that's normal that you would need, we do provide for that. We provide assistance with applying for benefits like SNAP or food stamps, Medicaid, and KTAP. We have our case managers will always strive to get them signed up for every benefit that they qualify for, even if, like, say they come to us and they don't have a job and they qualify for these services, and then later on down the road they have a job and they don't qualify, they still can get those benefits while they can. And for example, with SNAP benefits, they don't go away. So if they collect the SNAP benefits before they get a job, and then they get a job and maybe they cut them or they don't have as many, they can keep those while they're here and not use them. And then they have this little bit of surplus when they move out into an apartment. We also have play areas for children both inside and outside with a dedicated child advocate. We want to make sure that children are well taken care of here. We don't provide on-site daycare, but we do, of course, sign them up for daycare benefits through the family support office and try to get them as much help as we can. But we do have a child advocate that meets with them and talks with them and does groups with them and talks about emotional regulation, and really just goes over some things that maybe those kids have not had as far as healthy communication with their families. And so talking about some statistics on intimate partner violence, these are statistics for everyone. So 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will experience some sort of intimate partner violence during their lifetime. Now, this includes emotional violence. It includes where they are reporting that they've had a time when, even though someone's not physically hurt them, they've feared for their life. So that's what that statistic is. Oddly enough, the statistic for how many women will have sexual abuse is actually not too much off of that. It's like 1 in 7 during their lifetime will have some form of sexual abuse. So it's not very much different when you're talking about sexual abuse versus all types of abuse. The rate of violent crimes against persons with disabilities is 12.7 per 1,000, is more than 3 times the average of 4 per 1,000. That is violent crimes. That's assault, sexual assault, all of those. That's from the U.S. Department of Justice. They say that it happens about 3 times more with people who have some sort of disability than it does with the general population. Women with disabilities have a 40% greater risk of violence than women without a disability. And that's from the NCADV, which is the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. They also say that the most common perpetrators of violence against women with disabilities is their male partner. That's not always the case, but it is the most common perpetrator is the person you're supposed to be in an intimate relationship with. And I think that even though that's also the most common perpetrator of women in general, but I think it's much more prevalent with women with disabilities because they're more dependent on their male partner when they're in a relationship. Women with disabilities are 3 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than women without disabilities. And then between 97 and 99% of perpetrators are known and trusted by the survivor, with 32% being family members and 44% being caretakers. And it did say that the 32% and the 44% include a variety. Some of those are intimate partners and some of those are not. I don't know why they didn't split out the intimate partner from that, but they did not. Our local shelter here, so that's the Bethany House, we served 108 adults in 2023. And of the 108, and this is only the ones that we housed in shelter, 43 or 40% reported some type of disability, and 10 of those were physical disabilities and 1 being a deaf or hard of hearing person. And then in 2024, our shelter served 98 adults in shelter, and of the 98, 55 or 56% of them reported some type of disability, 13 of those being a physical disability. We do collect disability statistics in our shelter because we do want to know, well, for one thing, we want to know if they need any type of accommodation. We want to know if there's something that is going to maybe need something from us. But also we collect it because of statistics like this, where we can say in your area, this is what the statistics look like. This is not a national average. This is here in our buildings average. And I think that feels a little different because sometimes we think, well, we're in a rural area, maybe violence is not as common as it is somewhere else. But it is per capita about the same all over the United States when it comes to intimate partner violence. Disability data is not collected on any clients that we see outside of staying at the shelter. So clients that receive for advocacy, support group services, or just like in general crisis intervention are not included in that because we don't collect the information until they're physically with us. We don't ask it over the phone or ask it when they go to court. So that is the statistic that we have access to, is just who we served in our shelter. So why are people with disabilities more likely to experience abuse? This question gets asked every now and then it gets, when I do normal presentations with, say a population that doesn't have disabilities, sometimes they ask, well, are people who have disabilities more likely to be abused? And my answer is always yes, because of the statistics that you saw in the previous one. But a lot of times that people ask why that is. It is because of a lack of resources. They don't have transportation, access to a phone, or accommodations for their disability. If the person that you rely on for your ability to use a phone is abusive to you, then you can't use a phone. If you're a person who you rely on for your disability is your access to transportation and they abuse you, then you don't have access to transportation, or not safe access anyway. Some people lack the knowledge or skills needed to access help. That's across the board. Doesn't matter if you have a disability or not. They lack knowledge about services needed for assistance, like where the DV shelter is or how to call the DV shelter. And many services are not public knowledge and not provided in ways that are easily accessible to those with a disability. So maybe they're not provided, if someone's blind, they may not be provided in, a vision impaired way, like where that person could understand what that information is and how to obtain help. People with disabilities are usually dependent on other people, and an abusive person ensures that they're heavily dependent on them for care. We see women who come in here that don't have disabilities that are heavily dependent on their abusive person. So when you are talking about someone who has to be dependent on others for some part of their care, that puts them in a more vulnerable position. If the person with a disability reports, there's questions like, who's going to care for them? Where will they go if that person's who's providing their housing? If they have children, there's a lot greater risk of losing custody because the person that they had children with can say, well, because of your disability, you cannot care for those children, which we all know is usually not true. There's very few times that we've had someone who has disabilities, even physical disabilities, that's came through our building and not been able to care for their own children. There's also just that overall vulnerability in the ability of an abuser to take advantage in multiple ways. And what that means is that sometimes there's just a lot of mental abuse or emotional abuse, and we will talk about those kinds and types in a few minutes. But they go, if someone's going to be abusive to someone else, they go to a lot of lengths to control them, to control where they go and who they see and how they spend their money. And that's just easier to do if that person already needs assistance in some way, shape, or form. So now we're going to talk about what that abuse does look like. And I've already hit on a few of these pieces. There is physical abuse, and this is what everyone thinks of when they say, oh, someone's being abused. They think of physical abuse, number one. So that could be punching, kicking, hair pulling, choking, any type of, physical assault. Choking is particularly a thing that has come up in the last probably 10 years. Part of it was we are desensitized to it by movies like the 50 Shades of Grey and books like that. And so we think it's something that's supposed to go along with intimate partner relationships when really it's something that can kill you and should not be part of any healthy relationships, because even if you have a mutual agreement to do something like that, the risks on your health and damage to your throat is way too big for people to engage in that without it being considered abuse. They could damage property, and that would be physical abuse. They could prevent their partner from eating or sleeping. One of the things we hear from ladies who come in the shelter is that their partner controlled how much they ate, when they ate, locked up food, also controlled when they slept and would wake them up if they didn't like it that they were asleep. So that sleep deprivation messes with your mind and makes you more able to be controlled. Damaging or denying access to assistive technologies like their wheelchair, their communication device, their prosthesis, any of those things, if an abusive person wants to and they can take those away, that is physical abuse because they physically cannot, do anything without those assistive devices. Withholding, forcing, or manipulating medications. So that would be like making them take too much so that they'll pass out. Not giving it to them even though they know they're in pain, or denying them access to transportation to a medical appointment. So for example, if you know that you have to make it to this appointment, or you can't get your medicine, or you're not going to get a procedure that you need, and your partner's not allowing you to do that. There is an emotional verbal component, and some of these can exist without the other ones, but most of the time there is an emotional or a verbal component to all abuse. So there's going to be name calling, some sort of berating or yelling. There's going to be continual criticism or insults. There's going to be isolation from friends or family. They want them to be isolated enough that they don't talk to people. They don't tell people what's going on. So they start that process of pulling them away from other people, like saying, well, you're only talking back to me because you talked to so-and-so today. Or if you hadn't been talking to so-and-so, we wouldn't be having this argument. Shaming or blaming, like telling the partner that they deserve the abuse because of their disability. And that actually rings true for all versions of people across the board. It could be you deserve the abuse because of the color of your skin. You deserve the abuse because you have this history of doing this thing. You used to use drugs, so you deserve to be abused. There's hundreds of ways that people will shame and blame others in abusive relationships. They control their appearance, like their clothing, their makeup, and then they withhold affection as a punishment. So what is the number one thing that we all crave in relationships is affection, and withholding that is a form of emotional abuse. There are also psychological components to abuse, like changing the description of events or lying. This section a lot of times can really get serious and cause a lot of what we call post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. Threats to kill their partner or themselves. There's threats to harm children, pets, or service animals. There's threats to take the children or report the partner to social services. There's gaslighting or invalidating the partner's disability, making them feel crazy. And then there's threats to place them in an institutional environment. And that's the same thing. Like if you don't put up with what I'm doing, I'll put you in a nursing home. I'll tell everybody that you can't take care of yourself. There's sexual components to abuse as well. That's forcing sexual acts with them or other people. Pressuring for sex after one has said no. I feel like that's a lot of times more common, and women don't, and even men don't necessarily think that that's abusive, but it is. Anytime you say no and someone pressures you until you give in and say yes, it's considered abuse, even if you're married to that person, even if there's a relationship there that's been there for years, it's still abusive. Using drugs or alcohol to lower a person's inhibitions. Making a partner feel scared about what will happen if they say no. So, maybe there's been physical abuse or something like that in the past, and they say, well, if you don't, then you know what'll happen. And it goes back to maybe the physical component of it, or even, threats to harm, children, pets, or service animals. Videos or photos taken without consent or even distributed without consent. We have that happen a lot also with ladies who come in shelter, is that they will consent to photographs or videos while they're in the relationship. But if something happens in the relationship, their abusive person will release those photos on the internet or to friends and family. And of course, that's embarrassing and it's awful for the person, but it also is a form of sexual abuse, and it's a form of controlling that person. I control who sees that video. I can control you. Inappropriate touching, like during hygiene or dressing. So that was one that I found interesting. I had never actually thought about that one before I was doing this PowerPoint and really thinking about what it's like for a person with a disability to be in abusive relationships. But if you can't dress yourself and you're dependent on someone else, even if that's not your intimate partner, if you're dependent on someone to dress you or to bathe you and they touch you in a way that you don't like, how hard would it be for you to find the voice to really fight against that? It's hard for women to find a voice to talk about inappropriate touching or someone who touched them inappropriately anyway. And so I feel like it would be 4 times harder if that person is who's taking care of you, if that is your person who you count on to bathe you and dress you every day. I feel like that would be so difficult for people to tell or to stand up and say, no, you're not coming back because you touched me inappropriately. Like that would be very, very difficult. And then the last category is financial abuse, not allowing the partner to have a job or to make their own money, intentionally ruining their credit, stealing or withholding a partner's check or money. So if they do receive their own money, they withhold it. Breaking necessary items for the partner's disability, like if they break, something that they need to use, like those assistive technology devices, and then the person does not have the funds to replace them. So, they kind of control what they can use because they've broken what they need to break in order to keep that person under control. Taking out loans or credit cards without the partner's consent. And then misuse of just general control of the partner's money. So maybe it does come into a bank account where they have access to it, but they won't take them to the bank to get it, or they use all the money off the card without permission. Something that we see in shelters sometimes is people who are receiving disability, every now and then you have to make a visit to the Social Security office in order to keep those disability funds, or you have to do something in order to, keep the funds. And sometimes an abusive person has not allowed them to make that visit to the Social Security office. So they end up losing their disability check And it's very, very, very difficult for them to get that back once they've lost it. Some people it's easier than others, but especially if it's been a while, like if it's been 2 years, the Social Security's office is like, well, I mean, you survived for 2 years, like, like why give this back to you at this point? And so we have had case managers that have assisted with that process and took them down there and tried to get those checks reinstated, because they needed to get their money back. They didn't have any kind of resources anymore because they didn't have any money. We also talk about violence in the context of friendship. So there are some similarities and differences. Friendships can be abusive as well as intimate partner relationships. We do see that intimate partner relationships are usually more involved. The abuse is worse. Emotions are typically stronger in those type of relationships, and there's attraction and love there. So the impact of having abuse in an intimate partner relationship seems to be larger. But similarly, there is still an emotional bond between two people when they're friends. So we all have to have social contact. That's necessary, just being a human being. We have to have those. And friendships can be physically abusive. I don't think some people realize that there's physical components to friendships that can create the same feelings and dynamics as if your intimate partner abuses you that way. Your friendship also can. There was a story that someone told me one time about the fact that they had this really good friend, and they thought that they were the same, they were the same sex. They were both women. They were super good friends and everything was okay for a while, but then she noticed that there was these emotional abuse components. Like when she said that one day she read over a list of red flags for relationships, because she was trying to, she wanted a romantic relationship with someone. And when she's reading those red flags, she found red flags that directly correlated to her friendship, not her romantic relationship. So her friend didn't want her to have any contact with any other friends. She just wanted her to be friends with only her. She would get very angry with her and call her names if she didn't do what she wanted her to. She would sometimes be physically abusive. For example, she would pull her hair and then be like, oh, sorry, and try to play it off that she didn't do something wrong. Sometimes she would kick her and say it was because she was just joking around. And so that list of red flags that she was reading in order to see if her romantic relationship was good was actually a clue that her friendship was not good. And I think it happens more than we think about, even with just the emotional component of someone who's wanting to control us, wanting to be in charge of that relationship, when all friendships and intimate partner relationships should be partnerships. They should not be issues of control. The dynamics of both are really hard to navigate too. When you're thinking about the relationships you have as a teenager or a young adult, it's really hard to figure out relationships. It's hard to figure out friendships. And then it's also hard to figure out romantic relationships. Like, how do I get through this relationship? How do I know what's healthy and what's not? And then relationships are just hard. And it's more hard to keep the power balance between two people who already have a power disparity. So when we talk about power disparities, that's, for example, like a man and a woman. Women have a power disparity. They have a little less power usually in relationships, not always, but usually they have a little less power. They make a little less money. They are responsible for childcare, so they're kind of tied to their children more than a man is. They are less likely to be promoted most of the time. And so there's a power disparity. There's the cultural power disparity between them, in the expectation that the woman will take responsibility for the home and the children, and that the man will take responsibility for, making money and things like that. So it's the bigger the power disparity, the harder the relationship is. And so when you think about someone who also has a disability, particularly probably women with disabilities, then you're thinking that there probably is a huge power disparity between those two people. And then friendships, of course, tend to involve more tactics and manipulation, whereas intimate relationships, it's more threats than it is that subtle manipulation. So what does healthy look like? That's the big question that everybody wants to know is, what does a healthy relationship really look like? Well, healthy people always use respect, and they're respectful. There's a website that's called Love Shouldn't Hurt. It is geared toward young adults and teenagers. And it shows lots of videos. Sometimes I show it in my teen dating violence PowerPoint as examples of, just some things that go on in relationships between young adults and teens that is about love shouldn't hurt. And it's not talking about that it shouldn't hurt, like when you break up with someone or something, happens and you split. Obviously, that is a time when people do get a little bit of heartbreak, but love shouldn't hurt while you're in the relationship. Love should not be painful, either emotionally or physically. So it's a good website to check out. Healthy relationships look like the things on this slide. People enjoy spending time together, either with each other's friends, as a couple, and separately. You have to have all three of those components in order to have really healthy relationships with others. They support the other people's goals in life. They always feel safe with one another. That's what I tell people sometimes in shelter, women that we have come through here. I'll say, have you ever felt safe in a relationship? And a lot of times the answer is no. And I'm like, stop being in relationships with people you don't feel safe with. And stop being in this position, putting yourself in this position where you're a little unsure of what that other person's going to do. They also have trust for each other. They respect each other's opinions, even when they're different. They accept responsibility for their actions and they apologize. I think that's a big one. Apologies are important. So if you make a mistake and you say something you shouldn't, then apologize. That way you are still in that healthy relationship zone. You admit what you did and you apologize. They solve conflicts without putting each other down, cursing, or making threats. Anybody that called you names is probably not a good person to be in a relationship with. They have control of their own money. They're proud to be with each other. I think that's a huge one personally, is why would we be in a relationship, particularly an intimate partner relationship, but even friendships, where the other person is not proud to be our friend and is not proud to say, that's my friend over there, and I love that person. They encourage each other's interests. Everyone has privacy of the phone or conversations with other people. You have to maintain that privacy level. I tell teens that anybody who checks your phone or wants to look at your phone all the time, or that wants to have access to your Facebook or Instagram, whatever, that's probably not a healthy relationship, because they don't have to have access to that to trust you. And them having access shows that they don't trust you, and that probably there's some things going on in that relationship. They have close friends who like that person and are happy about the relationship. So the people who are closest to you, your family, your friends, should like your intimate partner too. They also should like your friends. If you have a friend group that your parents and your cousins and, all the people who are close to you that's been with you all your whole life, if they don't like that relationship, then it's probably not a good relationship for you, because they're seeing it from the outside in. Never feel pressured for any sexual intimacy with each other. Communicate with each other frequently without fighting, and then allow each other space when they need it. Have fun together more often than not. Having that fun and lightheartedness when they get together, rather than it always be what we call walking on eggshells. So how can I educate my loved one and prevent them from unhealthy relationships? So this is just the things that you can do in order to just promote healthy relationships, particularly, of course, in younger people. So for example, you just want to educate them on those characteristics that were on the previous page. You want to ensure that they're in control of as many aspects of their life as they're capable of managing at whatever age they're capable of managing it. So for example, I have teenagers, and getting them a bank account when they're 16 with me on it is an important part of the stepping stones of life, because I'm trying to teach them money management without them being fully in control of it. And then once they get fully in control of it, then I can, they'll start themselves a new one. They'll remove me off of that. And then they will be more in control, and I can feel confident that they know how to do it. Empower them to know their worth. Always be encouraging people to seek out relationships that make them feel important and worthy. Because if you don't feel like you're worthy and important, then you're going to seek out the people who are unhealthy. You want to build self-esteem, make them feel capable and confident. You want to encourage friendships with supervision when they're young, identifying the positive and negative aspects as you go. So when they try to navigate, when they're in 5th and 6th grade, when they're navigating more of that friendship component, not yet romantic relationships, you can really start to identify what's positive. Like, my friend called me, a bully the other day. Well, why did your friend call you a bully? What was happening? What did you do? What did they do? And really help them think logically about that relationship and about who's good for them and who's not good for them. You want to utilize community resources to ensure that people stay connected to others. So that just means if you have a loved one who you are worried might be falling into a negative relationship, connect them with other people. Make sure they have places to go and things to do. They have hobbies, they have groups that they're involved in. They have other people that are going to be there and kind of show them and help encourage them toward positive relationships. Extracurriculars are so good for kids because they really encourage them to make relationships with other people. And most of the time, if you're all interested in the same things, you will find positive people in those groups. You want to model positive communication and relationships yourself. So you're involved in groups, you have positive relationships with other people. Utilize safety plans frequently, even if abuse has never occurred. So this includes talking to kids when they're old enough to understand what appropriate touch is, talking to them about what to do if something happens to them, if someone touches them inappropriately, or what to do if someone's mean to them, or how to tell adults when they're little, so that when they get teenagers or young adults, they know how to contact someone and to disclose when they're being abused. They know how to get themselves safely out of that situation because they've practiced it as a young child. And even if you've never done a safety plan with someone, it doesn't matter if they're 100, you can still do a safety plan with someone, even if they've never had one before, because you can brainstorm what possible scenarios they could encounter and how that they would go about keeping themselves safe in those different situations. We do it over the phone all the time. Our crisis line is available 24/7 for safety planning. So if someone ever really needed that safety planning and you didn't know how to do it, you could always refer them to that. And then there's other crisis lines that might have other types of safety planning involved too, like the suicide hotline does safety planning as well. You want to make sure you listen and believe the person's story. So don't ever question if someone does tell you that something's happened to them. Listen to them and really believe them. Sometimes even if you don't, even if you feel like they're not being honest with you, if they're just telling you something, always believe them. Always just say, those supportive things for them. Be that supportive person in their life and really say, hey, I'm really sorry that happened to you, because you can't do anything about it most of the time anyway. You're probably not the person that they need to be reporting it to, and you're probably not the person that ultimately will be able to do anything about it. So make sure you're believing them. So what can you do if you suspect someone is in an unhealthy relationship? You can ask questions. Open-ended questions are better. We all know that closed-ended questions, especially if you're talking to a teen or someone who's upset with you, is always going to be no, no, no. They're not going to open up and actually talk about anything. You want to make sure you ask and listen as if you know nothing about their experiences. Come from a place of complete ignorance and ask questions based on that. Don't assume anything. If you've observed behaviors that made you suspect abuse, like you saw things that are on that list that we talked about, point them out gently and in a safe and confidential place. Don't point them out in front of the abusive person. Don't put the person in the position where they have to lie and make that decision to lie in front of their abusive person. Express your concern about their safety and well-being. So when you're coming to them in that gentle, in a gentle way, in an empathetic way, you want to be sure that your primary concern and what you put to them as your primary concern is that you are concerned about their safety and well-being, number one. It has nothing to do with you or anything like that. It has to do with them, that you want them to be safe and you want them to be happy. And you're concerned that maybe this relationship is not making them safe and happy. You want to offer resources, information. Consider calling one of those crisis lines together. That way they can feel safe to open up to someone on the phone or even have that access later on. Reassure the person that's not their fault. No one deserves to be hurt. Sometimes people really do think it's their fault. And so making sure that they know that you don't think that they deserve to be hurt by someone else is important. Preserve the ability to make their own decisions if at all possible. And what that means is that obviously some of us have mandated reporting. So if this is happening to a child and they disclose abuse to you, or if someone says they want to harm themselves, you have a responsibility to get them assistance right then. But if it isn't that, and it's more that intimate partner violence and they're being emotionally abused and it's not a good situation and they do feel threatened, but there's nothing really happening. And so there's not something that's part of mandated reporting. Kind of preserve that ability of that person to decide when they leave. If they're being controlled, so many other decisions have been controlled by someone else that it's really difficult for them to be empowered to make a good decision. And the decision to leave is so hard. They're at the most risk when they're in an intimate partner relationship. They're at their greatest risk when they leave the relationship. So for example, the moment that they decide that they are going to leave and they start making preparations or plans to leave that relationship, they're at the greatest risk for death. So if their abusive person finds out, they might hurt them. And most of the time, people in these relationships really do have a fear that they're going to be physically harmed. So letting them make the decision is letting them be comfortable and confident in that decision and not back out at the last minute or come to a place like this at a shelter and change their minds and go back. If they've made that decision, then they will be more likely to stick with it. And of course, be patient with them and listen. And the being patient part a lot of times is because it takes an average of 7 times leaving someone to actually leave an intimate partner relationship that is abusive. So you may have someone who struggles with that and goes back and forth a lot. And just being patient with them and listening to them really helps them to understand that you don't blame them, that you're not saying that it's their fault that they've been abused again because they went back, because that's what some people will say. They'll say, well, you shouldn't have went back. That's what you get when you go back. But it's important to realize that they actually do love that person and they do have a relationship with them that's real and that is important to them. And so them actually going and leaving that relationship is a huge deal. It's leaving someone behind that you do have feelings for because they've hurt you in this way. And so I think some people kind of underestimate that difficulty and they really push people to leave before they're really ready. Even coming here, we call them, repeats. They come multiple times to the shelter and they tend to eventually they'll make a decision and they will leave for good, but it's hard for them. They have a lot of trouble getting to that point. And so sometimes the first time that they reach out might not be the time that they leave for good. Don't use words like should, must. Don't give direct advice. Try to let them have some autonomy in their own decisions. Don't be judgmental or aggressive when you discuss options. If you go in there and you say, this is what we're going to do, I'm taking you to this shelter and you're doing this and you're doing that, they're probably not going to go with you. And they're probably not going to open up to you the next time either. Don't judge or criticize the abusive person. Those complicated feelings that I talked about before, if you judge that abusive person and you really say, oh, they're just this terrible person, they're no good for you, the victim or the person that you're trying to get help for is going to pull away from you because they do have feelings for that person. And even if they've said it, you agreeing with them is not the way to go about getting them to actually leave the relationship. If you do have to report the abuse, tell the person if possible that you're doing so, or do it anonymously. If that comes back to them that it was reported, like for example, something happened with their kids and their abusive person hit their kid, well, you've got to report that. You need to tell them in that moment, hey, you have shared something with me and I'm a mandated reporter and I must call that in, but I will help you through this process. I will help you every step of the way. And this is what is for the best. Even though it don't feel like it in this moment, this is what I have to do. And that way they're not surprised, because if the DCBS worker, if they say, well, who made the report? And the DCBS worker tells them, which I don't think they're supposed to, but it's happened before, then you will have lost your footing as a friend to that person, because they'll feel like they've been lied to or tricked. Don't force the person to leave. They do have many reasons to fear leaving, and it will cause them to withdraw from you. Do not pretend to be an expert on their life. Everybody's life does look a little different. And so sometimes people put up with things that we think are awful and abusive, especially when it comes to maybe some of that emotional abuse. We think and we know that that is abusive. However, that person sees it as being their best option right then. So don't pretend to be the expert, let them be the expert on their own life, because they do know their experience better than anyone else. Don't tell other people or break their confidence unless absolutely necessary to do for safety. So try not to break a confidence is hard sometimes when you know someone's probably physically in danger. And if that person really has disclosed and you know that you can help them. So for example, that's their caretaker, and you can call that company and that person will never come back again. I think that that's appropriate. I do think that you would want to always tell the person that you're going to break their confidence and call that agency or that company, or that person. You're going to call somebody, you're going to tell somebody, because then you've preserved your relationship with that person. And then do not make the person feel crazy or stupid if they're making a choice you don't like. And that's something we tend to do a lot when we really don't agree with people's decisions, is we tend to say, well, you're just being crazy. This is crazy. It's crazy to stay in this relationship. And making that person feel that way is not going to make them come back the next time they want to talk, or when they are ready to leave the relationship, they probably won't pursue that safety plan and doing that with you. So here's your resources. I did include the Bethany House Abuse Shelter in our 24-hour crisis line. And this would be to call for shelter. This could be to call for safety planning. It could be if you need somebody to go to court with you or help you file an EPO. It could be for any of those reasons. There's also the hotline.org that offers online chat and text options, as well as the phone option. And they do the same things. So they will help you make a safety plan. They will talk to you about resources. They'll talk to you about what healthy relationships look like. And they can talk to you about any of those things. Our agency's like overarching agency, like that's the state coalition essentially for domestic violence, is ZeroV.org, and that does provide a list of shelters in all the counties that they serve across Kentucky. Kentucky has a shelter assigned to every county, so you can find out what that shelter is and how to access them. And then the Center for Prevention of Abuse, that is information resources. It's got lots of good stuff about all sorts of abuse, child abuse, intimate partner violence, elder abuse. It's got all kinds of things. And then domesticshelters.org has a list of shelters nationwide with their hotline numbers. It also has really good trainings if you're interested in some free trainings or webinars about domestic violence. It does have all of those as well. And so that kind of concludes that. I am available to take some questions if somebody has some.
I'm keeping an eye on the chat, Elizabeth, and I haven't seen any yet. Kelly, if you wouldn't mind to go ahead and put the closing slide up. While folks are taking a minute, maybe you're typing in the chat or Q&A function to ask Elisabeth questions. We do want to thank Elisabeth so much for joining us today. This was absolutely a wonderful webinar where I know I learned a whole lot. I know we had several comments in the chat throughout, thanking you for pointing out different pieces in your presentation that very heartfelt. We very much appreciate that. We do want to ask everyone to take a moment and fill the evaluation survey out. There is a link in the chat as well as a QR code. You will receive a follow-up email as well with all links shared today, as well as the evaluation link. We want to hear from you. What did you like? What did you love? Maybe something you didn't necessarily care for. It's still important to us, and we want to hear about that. Your voice is what matters, and we are here for you, for all families across our state. And we want to make sure we're bringing meaningful, valuable information to you. Our contact information is on the screen, and it will be in the follow-up email as well. I am going to pause. I seen Kelly come off of camera, and we'll see what she has to say before we close out today.
So I just wanted to say, Elizabeth, thank you. I voiced this in the chat, and I don't know if you had seen it, but it is hard as a parent of a person with a disability, especially when you recognize, right, that they're not in a good situation. And I went through this, have went through this a whole lot with my adult son, he's now 28. But it started when he was in school, and he received SSI benefits, and we've always been, very transparent with him. This is your money. It is not my job to control your money. And we were always very honest with him. So he was given that, that freedom to make choices about his money. And that being said, he was manipulated and used a lot. Because he would drive anybody anywhere, he would buy anybody anything. He couldn't stand the thought of someone not having money to buy what they want. And so it's really hard to navigate, tread those waters of allowing them to learn natural consequences and jumping in to protect them. So I just wanted to say that I really appreciate that you pointed out the importance of autonomy, and when they are capable of making those decisions, allowing them to make those decisions. But I also, on the flip side of that coin, I understand how hard it is. And I've been that person to confront those people that were manipulating or using. And it's just really hard. It's really hard to tread in those areas, because you also don't want to have a negative impact on the relationship that you have with that child loved one. And you don't want them to be, if they're in a really bad, if they're in a bad enough situation, you can always see that they'll be, taken away from you. And that's not what we want. So I just wanted to, come on and say thank you so much for shining the light. And I also really appreciated how you mentioned specifically their disability benefits being taken away, because there are a lot of people in this world who view people just as not wanting to follow up, being too lazy to do something, and they never consider outside circumstances. They don't consider those things. So I think you did a fantastic job. And I just wanted to thank you again.
I really do appreciate you all inviting me to come in to speak here. And I feel like that the things that I talk about, I do talk about them in general, with people who maybe don't have, a disability that's there. But when you're thinking of people who are all the more vulnerable because they have that disability, then you do come up with it's new ways for people to be controlled. And that autonomy and stuff is so, so important for everybody. If you feel like you're not making your own decisions, that's something that can really mess with you and can really change the way you feel about yourself. And allowing them to have that autonomy, but still caring about that person is really hard. Seeing family members, kind of go through not having a disability, but having a drug addiction, I see it there too, because there's not a lot you can do to really help that person until they want your help. And that's a really hard position to be in too. So I do appreciate you all inviting me to speak though.
Well, thanks again. And folks, we will be sending out a follow-up email with all of this wonderful information that was provided today. And we do encourage you, if you need assistance with anything, please feel free to reach out to us. We can also get information over to you on how to reach out to Elisabeth if you need her assistance as well. And we hope that we see you back next month at our Lunch and Learn. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.